Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm sure you're going to hear this a lot today, but happy Mother's Day. It's so great to see everyone here. For those of you who may not know me yet, my name is Janet Archibald, and I am the administrator here. I also get the wonderful privilege of sharing God's words with you. I do have a little picture of my family up here behind me. I am a mom, I am a wife, I'm a daughter, and got Henry and Daniel in there. Even the cats made it in there. So we got Henry and Daniel in there. My wonderful husband is back there running our slides today. And yeah, it's mothering is definitely an adventure, right? And I know that it's a hard adventure sometimes. And there are some of us here who are grieving loved ones, and there are some of us here who want to be a mother, want to give birth to children, and haven't been able to do that or are having a hard time with that. So I understand, and I totally get that Mother's Day can be hard. And we're with you in that, and we want to pray with you with that. But we also want to celebrate the joys of motherhood. Just the little things, like I got a little sheet of paper from one of my sons today. They did this in school where they did things about my mom kind of thing. And one of them was, what does my mom want most? He put a rainbow cat. And I'm like, I never knew it till now, but that's exactly what I want. So motherhood can be hard, but gosh, it can be a lot of joys. And as we'll see here today from our story, there are a lot of ways that we can mother. So this is our prayer for you and our encouragement for you today. So yeah, with mothering, there can be those dark valleys that we walk through. There can be those mountaintop moments. There can be times when we may feel like we're alone in a wilderness. And then we can feel those moments where, as we sang about today, and as Psalm 23 says, God leads us and lets us rest in peaceful meadows. And then there are times where we're like, man, I got this mothering thing down. And then maybe the next second you're like, what do? I have no idea. What is this mothering thing? I don't get it. So as I was preparing for this message, I thought about all the women from the Bible and the great examples that they are for us. Because you know what? They went through a lot of these same things. And yet through it all, they trusted in God. And they followed God. And they followed Jesus, even into the unknowns. And guess what? They made mistakes. And they turned to God in their trials. They were humble, teachable, and willing. Their examples to us are legacies that have led us through these thousands and thousands of years. And we get to talk about two of these women today as we go through the book of Ruth. Now, you may be familiar with the story of Ruth. If not, this is a great story. And if you are familiar with the story of Ruth, I hope that you can find some encouragement and some new things from her story today. But overall, their story is one of hardship, hope, a legacy, and faithfulness to God. And it's really a story about mothering and God's provision. So as with all stories, it starts in the very first verse, very first sentence. And it says, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. So if you're not familiar with the story, there is some historical context here that I'll go through quickly, I promise. So the Moabites were descendants of Lot, who was the nephew of Abraham. And God promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation, which turned into the Israelite people, which Elimelech and his wife and sons were a part of. However, many bad choices and the worship of pagan gods turned the Moabites from relatives of the Israelites into enemies of the Israelites. So the fact that this Israelite family moved to the country of Moab must have meant that things were really bad in their hometown of Bethlehem. And sadly, things get worse. So this man, Elimelech, he dies, leaving his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons in a foreign land. There is a ray of hope, though, as the sons marry two Moabite women who are Orpah and Ruth. But then tragedy hits again when both of these sons die 10 years later. This left 3 widowed and childless women in a time that was not kind to women, especially those who had been widowed and childless. So as in that situation, you had very little hope for employment, and you didn't have children who could help care and provide for you, which meant that they had no consistent way to feed themselves or pay for their home or other necessities. So Naomi later hears that the famine is over in her hometown, so she decides to return to Jerusalem, bringing her daughters-in-law with her. So we get to continue our story in verse 6 of chapter 1. So then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. So with her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where they had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." And then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. I promise things get better. This is sounding very down, but I promise things get better. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who would grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I'm too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to marry tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than you because the Lord has raised his fist against me." I'm going to stop right here real quick because these are some strong words, right? And as it's hard because Naomi is going through some really hard things. And I'm sure she feels like God has left her, and she feels like God has raised his fist against her. But I want to encourage you today, and as we'll see as we get through this story, that God does not leave us. He does not raise his fist against us, especially as we're going through trials like this. So Naomi may have felt this. And I love that they put this here because this is Naomi being honest. And sometimes we need to have honest conversations with God like this. But know that God never leaves you. Okay, verse 14, we're continuing our story. "And again, they wept." Man, I'm feeling sad now. I'm like practicing this. I was like, oh yeah, going through it. But I'm like, man, this is heavy. Okay, we're getting there. "And again, they wept together. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. 'Look,' Naomi said to her, 'your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same.' But Ruth replied, 'Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us.' When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said no more." So this mothering adventure that we were kind of talking about is not going so well for these 3 women. All 3 of them were about to step into an unknown world. Even though this was Naomi's homeland that they were returning to, it had been well over 10 years at least. And she was returning as a widow with very little hope. And so I wonder if you have ever had a season like this. And I wonder, maybe mothering is or was that season for you. Maybe you're stepping into a season that is completely new to you. Maybe a season that seemingly has little hope. Even though these things look bleak, there is a beautiful display of mothering and love in this passage. So we don't know much about the life of this family before this part of the story, but we can see a lot of evidence of love and kindness in this family. Naomi loves and cares for her daughters so much that she would bear the pain of separation and probably a lot of loneliness just so they could have a better future. Both Orpah and Ruth cling to Naomi, showing their love for her, and they weep at the prospect of leaving her. And then Ruth stays, again, showing this incredible love that they must have had for each other. Instead of going back to the things and people that Ruth knows, she decides to go to an unknown place full of unknown people and to an unknown future. And again, she does this out of obvious love for Naomi. We can also see the love that this family must have had for each other, like through this passage. But then there's also this aspect of love of God that we can see in this passage. So Moab, as I mentioned, was a nation that worshiped many gods, just not our one true God. And Naomi even says this. She says, go return to your homeland, to your gods. And yet Ruth says that Naomi's God would be her God. So in those 10 years of marriage, there must have been a lot of conversation about God and his ways. So much so that whatever this family said to Ruth must have convinced her that God was worth all the unknowns. This is mothering. Not just showing love, tenderness, and compassion and care for those around you, but guiding them, showing them the way, and then pointing them to our loving and trustworthy God. And you know what? You don't have to have given birth to children to do this. And in fact, you don't even have to be a woman to do this. You can just be who God made you to be to do this. I think of our younger generation, and I just sense that they are crying out for love, stability, and truth. And they are hungry for it. And if you don't have children or grandchildren or even younger people in your life, guess what? You can start right here at Refuge. We have a growing number of children in our children's ministry. We have more and more youth coming, and there will always be a need for help, especially in those two ministries. And you know what? You don't even need to have any special skills. We got Kennedy back there. She's our children's director, and she is amazing. She's so great. She can help you in whatever, she'll tell you whatever she needs help with, and I know that she can help you along the way. And guess what? All we need is your presence. Like, your presence can do so much for these kids and our youth. In fact, Jeff has this great story of two older people. I can't remember how old he said. Do you remember how old they were?
Late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. And they were the greeters for the youth program. So they, it doesn't have to be anything big. If you don't like to speak, you don't have to do that. You can just be a greeter. And these people became the unofficial grandparents to every single youth that came. Like, they meant that much. And that shows you that you don't have to be young to do this. You can be whatever age. You can just show up, and that will mean the world to our kiddos. If nothing else, just try to connect with someone in the younger generation. And I wrote this and I'm like, you know what? Everybody needs connection. So just connect with someone, because we can, we can all learn from each other too. Take someone out for coffee or ice cream or, something fun like that, and just listen. I guess if you both try to listen to each other, that'd kind of be a quiet conversation. So try to have some conversation in there, but you know what I mean. Ask them questions, get to know them, show them the love of God that God has placed inside of you. Be Jesus to them. And through your love, care, and example, you get to lead them toward our loving God. It is really amazing what can happen when we show this kind of mothering to people. And this is certainly the case for Naomi and Ruth, as their story isn't over. As Naomi and Ruth continue to trust in God, as they're continuing in their unknowns, they show care for each other, and then we get to see God's care and provision for them as well as we go through chapter 2 of the book of Ruth. We don't know how much time has passed between these chapters, but we do know that after some point in their return to Judah, Ruth goes to Naomi and asks if she can start gathering grain from the harvesters that has been left behind in the different fields around Judah. Before the Israelites had even stepped foot into the promised land, God had provided instruction for them. When it came time to harvest, the harvesters were to leave portions of their field unharvested and were even to leave crops just left on the ground if they just fell there. And that way the poor, the needy, and the widows would have some kind of food and some kind of provision. We see this played out in Deuteronomy 24:19, which says, when you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you and all of the work of your hands. So this isn't just blessing those who are in need, this is blessing you, those who are being generous and showing the love of God. So God was already providing for Naomi and Ruth and others like them. And then God provides even more for Naomi and Ruth. As their story continues, Ruth ends up gathering the leftover grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who was a relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. And then as Boaz learns who Ruth is, he says, listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in the fields. See which part of the field they are harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well. Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. What have I done to deserve such kindness? She asked. I am only a foreigner. Yes, I know, Boaz replied. But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. Ruth and Naomi both stepped into the unknowns, and they took refuge in God. They trusted God, and God provides food, safety, and the kindness of a godly friend for them. And then chapter 3, we get to see this really funny motherly display from Naomi as she decides it's time to find a husband for Ruth. I love this part. This is hilarious. She's like, it's time for me to find you a husband. It's like, okay. So as a way to continue the family line and protect a widowed woman, it was expected that the closest relative of the man who died would marry the widow if he could. Naomi knew that Boaz was a close relative and instructed Ruth to visit Boaz in the middle of the night, which, yeah. I see this as more trust, her trust and loyalty to Naomi. It's a little weird, but it's really cool too, because she goes and asks if Boaz might be their family redeemer. Boaz is touched by Ruth's continued trust and loyalty, and he works things out so that he can be their family redeemer. So again, long story short, we get the happy ending. Ruth and Boaz marry, and Ruth becomes a mother to a son, Obed. And then Naomi continues her mothering adventure by becoming a very doting grandmother, which continues the legacy of love, kindness, care, and mothering. And we could stop the story there and be amazed at the provision of God and the strong and godly people in this story, but it's not the end. From this line, this family, came King David, who is described as a man after God's own heart. And as we keep going down this family line, we find that this family included our Redeemer. It included Jesus. A legacy of love, kindness, trust in God, and beautiful mothering led to our Redeemer. This got me thinking about legacy, and I wonder what our legacy is. Are we people who are consumed by our own fears, or do we turn to God in our troubles and our weaknesses? Do we stay in our comfort zones, or do we step into the unknowns, trusting that God is there the whole way? Ruth could have turned around and went back to her home. I'm sure she was really scared of the unknown and probably felt that pull of the comfort zone, Feel that pull of your comfort zone? And yet she stepped forward, trusting in God, who she was just getting to know at that point. She stepped forward wanting to show love, kindness, loyalty, and care to a woman who had most likely shown her a lot of the same. Ruth laid her burdens and fears at the feet of their family redeemer. And, we can do the same. We can trust that God's got our backs. We can trust him as we step into our own unknowns to follow his plan that he has for us. And we can show love, kindness, and care to others just like God has shown to us. We can lay our fears and our burdens at the feet of our Redeemer. We can lay them at the feet of Jesus. So mothering, just like our faith journey, is an adventure. So I want to encourage you today in your mothering and faith journey. I was reading this great article about Mother's Day, and it said something really great. It said that all mothers tell the gospel story. Like, wow, that's cool. Mothering is living a life of sacrifice, submission, trust in God. It is a story of the gospel, and it's a visual expression of God's love and care for us. So I encourage you today, whether you've given birth to children or not, I encourage you to share your love for those around you. I encourage you to follow the legacy of mothering that we find in the Bible. Keep turning to God. Ask him for the courage to share his love more with those around you. Tell him when things are hard. Tell him when things are great. I think we forget about that sometimes, but tell him when things are great. God was with Naomi and Ruth through their trials, their tears, and their unknowns. And I know that he does the same for us today. So we're going to spend some time in worship. We're going to get communion here in a little bit. With our worship here, we're going to spend some time in prayer. And as I was thinking about this message, thinking about this day, I sense that, there are some of us, like, this mothering journey, man, is definitely full of those highs and lows. And so I definitely want you to think about and pray about your mothering journey. Maybe your difficulties, maybe your joys. Maybe let's think about those joys today. Sometimes those difficulties can kind of take control. So let's think about some of those joyful moments too. And then this mentoring thing is on my heart. I'm lucky enough that I'm in a mentorship program right now, and it's been incredible since day one. But it can be hard to say, hey, I want to take you out to coffee, or I want to take you out for some ice cream. It can be hard to be vulnerable and to share ourselves. So if you have mentoring on your heart, I would encourage you to pray about that, ask for prayer for that, and ask for the courage to step out and actually make that invitation. Ask God to lead you in this mentoring thing too. And yeah, there is this comfort zone that we're so comfortable in. And I think that can be something that gets in our way sometimes. And so I encourage you to pray and ask for prayer to have that courage to step out of your comfort zone. So yeah, as I said, we're going to do some worship here. If you feel like standing, you are welcome to stand. Otherwise, this is a time where you can sit and just pray. You don't even have to sing. Just have a conversation with God. But hey, if you're in a joyful mood today, it's a great day to celebrate all the wonderful mother figures out there, whether you were born from them or not. So yeah, I just encourage you to do whatever you feel comfortable with doing.